All right. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy to have you here today on Chord. We've got a really cool podcast for you today, talking all about self love. I've got to say, first, though, Casey, thank you for being here because we've kind of pushed out that life happens.
Life happens.
Life happens.
Life happens.
Little car snafu, but here you are. And we just thank you so much for that. And we want to invite all of you who are watching today. First of all, thank you for being here. Second of all, if you've got questions throughout the show, just want to make sure that you get those in. And as we get them, we'll try to answer them as well. So, with that said, let's get started on Leslie's Lowdown on Life. I'm going to introduce Casey Jackson to you. He is the executive director of the Institute of Individual and Organizational Change. Casey's got over 35 years working in behavioral health. He passionately, and trust me, passionately encourages and empowers people to create and transform, in all the ways that they want to in their personal and in at their professional lives. And Casey, you and I have been friends for a long time.
Quite a while.
Quite a while. And I just learned some new things about you, which is what I always think is so cool. You're just one of the coolest people I know, one of the smartest of people I know. So again, just thank you. I know it was a lot for you to get here today. So just thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We're going to talk all about love today. It can be a
Okay.
tough week. For some people, if they don't have a partner, maybe they've lost a partner, there's a lot of pressure that goes into Valentine's Day, right?
Sure.
It's that time of the year, too, where people get the seasonal depression
Yep.
disorder. So that can be always a big concern. But what I love is that you're always growing and improving and doing so much more. So, therapist for many years, but you're world renowned and what I would call you've been invited to many different countries,
Yes.
more than
Yeah.
six, I think,
Yeah, somewhere in there. Yes.
to speak on motivational interviewing. And it's kind of a revolutionary transition from your basic therapy. So, talk a little bit about that. In a sense, your new practice that you've got going. So,
Yes.
tell us about that.
So, well, motivational interviewing is it's not the best term, but that's what the research has been done around. It's a method of communication. It was born out of the field of addiction. So, substance use treatment is where it started. It was revolutionary back then because, and I was in the field, started in the field as a clinician in the 80s, late 80s. And it really was more of a punitive approach, especially in the chemical dependency world. It was just a lot of blaming the individual, whether an addict or an alcoholic. You need to do this. We need to tear their defenses down. We need to build them back up. They need to learn how to do things right. Get them into treatment, get them into AA. And when people didn't do well, and the majority of people didn't do well with that model, then we just added more stigma and more diagnosis. And we didn't really turn the mirror on ourselves and say, okay, what are we doing that may not be effective for people that we're serving? So Dr. William Miller came along and just realized what we were doing wasn't helpful. And he was talking about how just confronting people doesn't change things. And everybody in the field's like, well, you have to confront them. They're addicts, they're alcoholics. And what he said is, well, if you can confront anybody, they're going to get defensive. So what he said is if we talk to people differently, and I mean, this in the world that you work within, when you interview people and you're not attacking them, if you genuinely are interested, they will talk to you. So
Yes.
that's where the concept of motivational interviewing came in. He said, so what I learned to do is if I just talk to people and interview them and listen to who they are. And what he used as examples back then was like a Diane Sawyer or a Barbara Walters. Like, people don't get angry at them. They spill their guts. Why do they spill their guts? Because they just listen and they're not trying to judge them or change them. They're just curious. And he said, so if you just interview people, you can find out that they're probably not happy with where they're at in their life. So like you were talking relationships. So this is where it started in the addiction world. Like, most people are not thrilled with where they're at with their substance use and the consequences, but it doesn't mean they're going to stop. But it doesn't mean they're not debating it all day long and torn up inside about that, mentally, emotionally about it. And so it spread really quickly from, just substance use into mental health field. It spread from mental health into the healthcare field. And once it spread into healthcare, then it started spreading internationally, that like, this is how the human brain works. Then I got obsessed with training on it about 20 years ago. And that's when I was like, this changed. It changed me as a person. It changed me in my relationships. It changed me when I became a father. It changed me in my friendships, because it's so much about how do we help people be the best version of themselves? How do you use language to do that? And that is different than therapy. So, having been a therapist where we diagnose people, we tell them what they need to do. If they don't follow it, they're non-compliant. We have to diagnose them and say, well, they're struggling with anxiety or depression. A lot of people, that just doesn't help build up a sense of self. Then there's all of these things that are wrong with me. And then you go to a therapist to fix those. And so I've been training on how do we communicate differently so we don't do that. And that's where the start of this thought of, okay, I'm going to, not only am I training on it, but I love Spokane, and being born and raised here as a Spokaneite. It's like I want to open a clinic where we're doing the things that I teach other people around the world to do, and get the benefit of that.
Yeah, I love that. And honestly, what I was listening to you, and it's the approach, and I'll call it old school approach, as diagnosing somebody. So pointing out a problem where somebody already feels like they've got a problem, and there's shame that comes along with that.
Absolutely.
And that's a stigma that kind of makes it hard for people to want to reach out to get help, because they're like, I don't need somebody else to tell me I've got another problem. I already know I have a problem, right?
Absolutely.
And so in the concept that you have set up and what you teach on, and I did get a chance to talk to one of your people yesterday, Austin.
Yes, you did.
And I was so impressed, because for me, and I'll go into this here. For me, I've been stuck on and off for years, right? I think we all go through those moments. So I don't feel bad saying that. But I was so impressed with how efficient. I want to say efficient. I also said direct, but direct can sound harsh, because he was so not harsh. He was very compassionate,
Yes.
very thoughtful, very intentional in his responses. I felt heard. And it was such a different, and I've been to a lot of therapy.
Welcome to America.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So, I've done the years of therapy, and I've done that, and so what I was so impressed with is the technique, and just how the conversation was talking about boundaries and talking about trust, and how, again, efficiently that he came back with responses that all of a sudden I went, well, why was I stuck there? All of a sudden I'd moved on.
Yes.
And this is what I said to him. Yeah, I've got 30 minutes. He's like, perfect. And he wasn't kidding. 30 minutes. And I was like, I don't know why I was ever stuck in the first place. But, I wanted to go from there, because I just want to be really candid with people. And I think this is a good conversation to have. We talk about seasonal, depression. We talk about, certain holidays can bring things up, but life is hard.
Yes.
Life is hard. It's hard to maneuver. It's hard to, get through. We have moments that are good and bad. And just so everybody knows, like, people think that anybody on television has a perfect life and perfect balance, and we make tons of money and everything is just wonderful all the time. And it's not. It's not at all. Life can be really hard. We're just people. And one of the things that kind of got me going with wanting to do this podcast was, comments that, how do you stay positive all the time? Or, you smile all the time, and people either like it or they don't like it, which, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm sorry, but that's what I do. But it was like, no, I go through hard times.
Well, and I've seen that.
Yes,
I've
you
experienced that with
certainly
you.
have, because we've been friends for a while, and you've
Yeah.
seen the hard times, going through broken relationships and losing somebody, and trying to maneuver friendships that you thought were something that end up not being what you hoped they'd be. And you've watched me shut down and isolate and turn off the world so that I could regroup and get
Yes.
myself together. So I want people out there to know that you're not alone. We all go through these moments.
Well, and my relationship with you, in watching those things happen and how it relates to everyone, is it doesn't change the core goodness of who you are, even when you're not feeling good. And I've seen that with you so many times, like when we're in public and you are always so nice to everyone that comes up to you, always. And that's
Mm.
genuinely who you are. And that's not a personality, that's just you. I know that because I know you so well. And I think people think that that can be a facade. There also is a survival mechanism that all of us have. Like when I'm training and on, and people want to, buy you drinks after a training or come sit with us or do those things, and you want to do that. But to be there for people the way that you're there for people, it takes a lot of energy to do that. So then there's a lot of recoup to that. So when things go off or go sideways in your personal life, like everybody does, there's those nights where you're just laying in bed staring at the ceiling going, what the heck am I going to do? Like this is, what am I going to navigate from here? And it it's why I'm so obsessed with teaching and practicing this particular way of talking with people, is because it just helps that human being make a values-based decision so their behavior does line up with who they are, how they define themselves, who they want to be. So it's not some expert coming in or even your, a close friend coming in and pouring a glass of wine or and having great conversation. It's how do you help that person think differently so their behavior, it gives them a north star to start to move in the direction of what would I do if I was going to be the best version of myself, and how do I walk through that, and just to be able to clear out all the white noise from social media and everything that's just pounding on us 24/7, to have that space like you said yesterday, a half an hour over lunch to just talk to somebody for a half an hour and just go, okay, now my brain is dislodged. Now I can go about my business. You don't have to be, diagnosed to do that. You're just a human being that's getting stuck.
Right.
So that's why I love this process. And then just watching, having had my experiences with you over the years in just the evolution of our friendship.
And honestly, that is what I liked when I had that conversation with Austin yesterday. It was that 30 minutes. I didn't want to rehash, and we didn't have time to rehash and like all the way back to childhood. And we all have childhood trauma, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just normal.
Yeah.
But it was just being able to point out a couple of things. Okay. And they were kind of broad, but it was, some things that I've really been working on. And just to have that moment where we were able to get unstuck within 30 minutes was pretty amazing. And I think just having that opportunity for people, because I think that they do feel like it's going to take months or years to be able to get somewhere. And it really doesn't have to be that.
No, no. The analogy that I use, and this is why, when I wanted to start the clinic, why I chose the concept of ascent is because one of the things that I teach in the method is I use this concept called focus mountain. And all it is that everything at the bottom is just trees that we all get lost in. It's the relationship, it's the job, it's the social media, the friends, drinking too much or eating too much or not exercising enough or afraid of this or afraid of that. It's just we're so stuck in those trees. And ascent was really the whole function of it, is to get focused on, we can talk about your childhood all day long, but as soon as you start getting clear what your core values are, that's where you're going to make a decision. But we are not trained to do that. We're just trained to, well, you need to break up with them, or you need to get a divorce, or you need to stop drinking, or you need to do this, you need to do this. And everybody's got an opinion. And the irony is that opinions don't help people solve problems. It actually creates more ambivalence. And more ambivalence just makes people feel more stuck and overwhelmed and makes them want to drink and be depressed and anxious. So having even good friends that tell you what to do, or your parents or your mother who cares so much about you, giving advice does not help the brain function better. It contaminates problem solving. Everybody throwing advice and opinions and just contaminates problem solving. But that's what we get trained to do. And that's what Western medical model does, is here's what you need to do. And if you're not doing it, you're non-compliant. Or, well, why are you telling me? I told you what to do and you're not listening to me. So stop talking to me about it. And it's like, but I can't resolve it. So it's a matter of resolving that stuckness instead of, jumping with lots of opinions.
Right. And honestly, it's like you read my mind, because I was bringing up like behavioral patterns, and there are so many different behavioral patterns that can get us into that stuck place. Like you said, drinking too much or isolating, or social media is such a big one. I think that even for me, that's been a problem. And I've had to say no and take that social media break.
Yes.
Because it can be so toxic.
Absolutely.
And I think, and I'm curious, and I really want to ask you, for people who are watching and they find themselves in that comparison, mode where they're looking at everything going, look at how great everybody's life is. Look at how wonderful that, look at how good they look. And by the way,
Yeah.
the filters on
Yeah. Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So it's like, look at how perfect, perfect, perfect. And then you end up going, I feel like such a loser.
Right.
And that's how you go to bed at night if you get stuck in. How do you feel about that and its effect on not only adults, but what about kids?
Oh, this causes me just my own angst around this whole concept because I have my own paranoia around AI. And then I have my own obsession with Chat GBT at the same time because it's so effective and so efficient. So, how do you find that balance? It's the same thing with social media. There is so much value to people not feeling alone, that they have a sense of belonging until it starts getting into comparison, and especially comparison with things that aren't real. It's the whole thing like the Barbie movie. When you get to the end of it, it's just like this is an impossible standard for everyone, for women,
Hmm.
for people that are in marginalized populations. It's like there's always this: you need to be here to
Hmm.
have value, and it it's just unrealistic, and it sets people up for what do you think it's going to set us up for? Depression and anxiety. And then we get depressed and anxiety and we start to feel isolated. Then what do? You start to scroll. And then you find your community. And then you have to adjust yourself to be part of a community. So then you start to lose yourself in the community you've adjusted yourself to get accepted by. And how does that not just beat us up internally with our self esteem and our sense of who we are? So now you're just stuck in these trees. And now you've gotten lost in the forest and you can't see the forest through the trees. I mean, that's just being living in the US right now. That is just 24/7, 365, like a blanket wrapped around your head. Like, how do you get out of that? So when you're talking about children and youth, if we're not teaching them values-based ways of thinking and deciding and making decisions, what do we expect? They're going to make a lot of reactive decisions because of what they see in social media that's not even based in reality. So, yeah, there's a profound impact on how that's going to impact people.
So profound. And it really is hard to love yourself when you're comparing yourself to everybody and everything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's almost just a dead end street right there.
This is why I'm so obsessed with this. And so many of the conversations you and I have had over the years, you will never go wrong when you get crystal clear of what your 2 or 3 core values are. Like for me, one of my core values is integrity. I really value connection. So what you're doing is in every single situation, you're making a decision. Does this behavior line up with my integrity? Does this behavior align with respect? Does it align with having connection or contributing to my community? And my behavior is either in alignment with it's not. When our behavior is not in alignment with it, what our natural instinct is to do is to blame other people or make excuses. This is why this method's so effective, because it circumnavigates all of that human dynamic to help us get back to what do I need to do to get my behavior back in alignment with who I know I am. That means you're not chasing people on social media, because that's not getting you closer to who you are. And so it just starts to recalibrate that, so when you can have a social media life that's healthy as long as you get clear about who you are instead of chasing to find out who you are or who you should be.
Yeah, and getting in your own head,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, you can get stuck in your own head and in that moment. And I have a friend, and Tracy and I have this thing, and when I'm stuck or when it's like, it's going to be okay, it's wine, wine, wine,
Wine.
wine.
Huh,
And it does, it kind of like, you kind of have to shake it up sometimes and say, okay, enough.
that's it.
You gotta break it up.
That's it.
Yeah.
And to
So,
shake that brain loose. I mean, you've got to
yes.
do that.
Yes. And then that's how you become unstuck. So let's help people out a little bit. If they're struggling right now, if they're dealing with some of the seasonal depression disorder, and it can be, I mean, we get some of those cloudy, gross days. Maybe they lost a loved one. Maybe they just broke up with a partner. What are some of the things, what are some good advice pieces that you would pass along to them?
I'm just going to talk about, because I know I have bias, like significant
Hmm.
bias. And so there is value in, if there needs to be a medical intervention, there needs to be a medical intervention. Like that, if there needs to be, and that's clearly indicated. But aside from that, what this is about is to be healthy, you have to make healthy decisions. That's just basic math. If you want to be healthy, you have to make healthy decisions. So if you're struggling with depression and you're isolating, you need to just get up and be able to move. And I know people say, but I can't even get up. Well, you can. And I'm not saying this is willpower. This is what would line up with you want to be, because you will get up and grab a pill. So you can also get up and walk around the block.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, absolutely.
I raise my
Yeah, I
hand.
know. It's your
Um,
podcast.
good point. We talk about isolating, and I didn't mean to interrupt you. And you're correct. You can get up. Is there a point where isolation can be a good thing? And I know that you're laughing inside a little bit because you know where I'm coming from with that. Because I did shut down, and I did put some pretty big walls around myself to protect myself, and then really try to figure out and go back to who am I? Who do I need in my life? Who are the important people to keep here, and who are the people I need to weed out that are toxic?
What you're talking about, Leslie, is so common, because what it is everything you're saying is a normal, natural human trauma response. It is a response to trauma. It is the brain's response to trauma. There, we talk about, there's a model that I was raised with as far as fight, flight, freeze, and then your emotional brain and your logical brain. That's been disproven. So that shattered everything that I knew about trauma. But then when you look at neuroscience, when you go through the experiences you've gone through, when you go through the trauma you go through, the brain has to shut down. It has to regulate energy for survival. And what happens is when the brain shuts down to go into survival mode, you're not getting the oxygen and nutrition. I always compare it to like the sea fan that when something swims by, it sucks down into the tube. Well, when it's down in the tube, it can't get oxygen or nutrition, but it has to do that for survival. And then slowly it will start to come back out again. The only way you can get oxygen and nutrition growth as a human being is you have to be able to come out and get that oxygen and nutrition. When you're down in the tube and you're isolating, you can't get that, but you need that for survival. That is a trauma response. So you're going to rethink relationships. You're going to rethink. Since we have capacity as humans to understand what are real risks of threat, we can also understand what are real ways that we can lean into growth. You will never, ever, you will never make a bad decision if you make a values-based decision. Most people want to make social-based decisions, and social-based decisions can bite you in the butt. But we don't get trained to do anything but usually socially based decisions, which wraps back into the social media loop. As soon as you get clear about who you are and what your values are, that's when you started coming out. That's when you made significant changes in your life, because you started getting clear what your core values were. You and I had some of these conversations multiple times over multiple glasses of wine.
Yes.
So
Rightfully so.
but it also is where it's like you started shaking off all that snow from yourself and from your brain and just going, I know who I am. I remember looking at the look on your face so many times of you just getting clear of going, that is who I am. Like, why am I doing that? I'm not a victim. I know who I am. I know where my strength is. And I know where my supports are. And as soon as you get clear about that, everything really does become second. So when people struggle with that, it makes sense why the brain gets sucked into it. But there has to be a decision of when, and it's not just this, oh, you need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps. That's not brain science. But what brain science is, honor the fact that you're stuck and experience trauma. But what can I do right now in this moment? What can I do that's going to get me moving in the right direction? It doesn't mean I'm not going to be depressed. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be anxious. It just means, what can I do right now? And there are things we do that shows, brain science shows, if you just get up and walk around the block, if you just start to write things down, if you just find somebody to talk to or write a letter to, that literally changes brain chemistry. It doesn't fix depression, but it changes brain chemistry.
Shaking it up.
That's shaking it up.
Have you ever, and I'm asking anybody who's watching, have you dealt with trauma? Have you felt like you need to isolate to protect yourself? Have you felt like you can't get up? I'm curious to hear from you out there. And then the other part of that question was, like, if you have isolated, if you've done these things, if you've gotten caught up in the social media, what I call death scroll,
Yeah.
how can we then, once we've gotten ourselves up, I always say it's just one day at a time or one foot in front of the other.
That's spot on.
That's all you can really do.
As long as it's oriented towards what are your core values. because then every day you get a decision, every moment, every situation, you get to make a decision. Is my behavior going to line up with my values? So if you want to move out of depression, you have to get your behavior to start to align with that. And again, what I will acknowledge is there's times that there's medical necessity for why somebody may need, medication or things to get unstuck. That's real. If brain chemistry is so adjusted a different way, then you need to maybe have medical intervention. But the thing to think about with this, Leslie, is so if we just played right now the theme from Jaws,
Mhm.
yeah, it would change your brain chemistry.
Dun, dun, dun.
Exactly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there's so many things we can do in a moment to change brain chemistry. When it starts to feed on itself and we start to circle in the depression, or you're talking the social media spiral or death scrolling, we know what that does to brain science. We know that what it does to brain chemistry, and that is not going to help us get less depressed. So what can I do in this moment right now that puts me one step closer to what my integrity is, to what self-respect is, to what connection is? And I can make a decision right now that will take me one step closer to that. And if you don't, you will not get unstuck. So your whole thing about, one step at a time, one day at a time, is every day you can take a step closer, and all of a sudden you look back and you go, I am so much closer to the integrity that I want to live by. I'm so much closer to the sense of contribution that I want to have in my community or to my family, the sense of connection that I want to have with people, the sense of self-respect that I want to have for myself. I have control every day if I take a step towards that. The problem is we always have reasons to justify and blame and make excuses. So this is why, like with what I do and what I teach, is how do you help people make those decisions to reconcile that quickly in the moment, so you can start moving forward more efficiently and more effectively.
So for somebody who is watching that is so far down in the weeds, and I asked this question from coming from that place at one point in my life, so far down in the weeds that they're like, I don't even know who I am, or I don't, what do you mean core value? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, we tend to put a lot of things in a category of values, like, I value work, or I value family, or I value my children, or I value, this is talking about core human values. And there's a finite number of core human values that are cross-cultural. And so there may be different words, different ways of looking at it, but it's not about family. Not every culture may value family the same way, or independence the same way, or collectivism the same way. Core values have to do with things like a sense of fairness, or a sense of well-being, or like I keep saying, for me, it's such a sense of integrity, or a sense of deeper connection, or a sense of contribution to your community. Because all decisions then become, is my behavior aligned with those core values or not? Which is different than we're talking about stuff, like jobs and trees and children and all this stuff. It's just like that. Those are just things we can walk towards, but we can chase those things. You've experienced that. Everybody's experienced this. You go for the relationship, you go for the job, you go for the person, you go for what you want, and it's not what you thought it was going to be, or it's not as comprehensive as we think it's going to be. You are never disappointed when you start to walk towards what your core values are, because you have a choice of whether or not you're operating with integrity. And what you find is then you find amazing people that are trying to walk that same direction as well too. So you're not looking for the person, you're looking for people that are living that same values-based way. This is why spirituality, religions, it's why people find a sense of belonging in those as well too. It's honestly why people find a sense of belonging in gang involvement. It's that same sense of belonging of, are other people living their lives the way I'm trying to live my life? And so you get people will start to come together in a sense of community or a sense of tribe in that.
Everybody wants to feel a part of something.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a part of that. I think it's just our DNA.
Yes.
To feel part of something. What would you say to somebody who is having a hard time with shame? Because shame can be heavy, and that can be from past mistakes or even abuse in growing up. If they're just wanting to shed that shame, what would you say to them?
That it's complex. It's not easy to do that. And part of it is there's life experiences. I'm going to go back into the brain science a bit around this as well too. What I think of with brain science, with stress, trauma, where shame comes from, is when you experience enough trauma, your brain basically just drives around the same little neighborhood, mostly for survival. And there's a lot of narratives around that we write for survival. The brain learns to write narratives in terms of what that's about. What we were, how, I bring this on myself? I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I let this happen. I should never let this happen. Well, I didn't have a choice, but maybe I did have a choice. Like all of these confusing narratives that our brain writes. So your brain just kind of drives in a very tiny neighborhood, and thinks through these thoughts that are very limited. And it's very anxiety producing to go outside of that neighborhood, even if it's on a nice country road, because that's not where you're used to driving. You're not oriented to that. So it's so hard to break free from it from a brain science perspective, because it's just what our narrative has been done from that survival brain. So if you're exposed to it for long periods of time and you're down into that tube or down into that shell hiding in a trauma response, and you have to do that a lot because of significant trauma, the brain has just gotten trained to regulate energy that way. So there's a lot of anxiety. So it's not we've just, for the, since psychology started, there's just so much put on the person or the mechanisms around it. So we start to think, well, you just need to pull yourself up. You just need to shake it off and get out of the house. You just need to, get back into the dating pool again, or you just need to do this again, as if it's just somebody telling you to do it is going to change how your brain developed. Like you look from that lens, you're going, that's just asinine. That's just not even, it doesn't even make sense. So what you need to do is you start to move the brain slowly out into driving on different pathways or different roadways, or starting to expand out to what life is like when you can just drive and breathe, driving on a country road instead of being paranoid driving in a neighborhood where you don't feel safe and you're just always trying to protect yourself. So even when you get out of this nice open air, there's an anxiety about that as well too. So that is all tied up in the shame part of it. But what it is that our brains have the capacity to go, but I want to be in a place where I can live and feel free and free from that shame. Any thoughts about any of that?
No,
Because I'm going to go on a roll here in a
no,
second.
that's good. It's good. And I've got a couple more questions for you. So, but go on a roll.
Okay. So this is one of the things that's so fascinating. Research just came out 2 years ago. They did this huge meta-analysis. So they did this literature review about why do human beings improve a behavior, like their behavior actually improves. And they did a literature review. They gathered research articles that were 50, 60, 70 years old, and they distilled them down to why will a human being improve their behavior, especially if there's an intervention. And what they found is it doesn't matter what model you use, and all of us get trained in models. What it comes down to is the person that's talking to you, if they have certain attributes. And this is what you're talking about, like you're in your conversation with Austin. The number one most potent thing is if they can talk to somebody that lets them feel heard and seen and understood and not try to fix it. That is the number one factor for a human being improving their behavior, is to know that somebody sees them, hears them, and understands them, and they don't even need to try to fix them. There's acceptance, which means that you have value just because you were born. You don't need to get good grades. You don't need to play a musical instrument or play sports. You don't need to prove anything to have value. And if somebody treats you that way, all of these things relax your brain. If somebody who talks to you is very authentic and genuine, and if they fundamentally treat you with positive regard. Because if you do that, you create psychological safety. And when people have psychological safety, the brain can start to get that nutrition and oxygen and start to grow and move again. So.
Wow. Huh. Okay. Let's talk about loss.
Okay.
Loss is a hard one, and it can really get people. Mm-hmm. I know we both experienced loss. You've lost your parents. Lost my stepdaughter to cancer a few years back. When that happened, I remember people saying, "Well, you should be getting up and getting back out there. Why is it taking you so long?" And I remember telling people after that loss, I'm not the same person. I felt so traumatized. And I think I still have a little, I call it PTSD. There's some trauma that goes along with that, and a loss with anybody for that matter. If somebody is experiencing a loss, what do you say?
That it's normal, that the feelings you have are normal, and your discomfort is going to make other people feel uncomfortable, and other people don't want to feel uncomfortable because of your situation. So they're going to say, you've been grieving a lot, you need to go talk to somebody, maybe you need therapy, maybe you need this, maybe you need this, because people do it because they want to help. But all those things have been shown, and this is that research that I, been obsessed over, is that everybody giving advice and opinions has very low potency on people actually getting better, not feeling lonely or lost. It's to be able to be present, and people are just uncomfortable because they want to help and they want to fix. There's actually a term called the righting reflex. The way people we see people struggling or floundering or doing something we don't agree with, our natural instinct is to try to make it right. So if somebody sees you grieving and you've been grieving for months or longer, they just want to jump in and try to fix it, like a fixing reflex. And all it does is it just puts you on your heels and makes you want to shut down and feel like I have nobody to talk to because nobody understands what I'm feeling right now. And this is why, with that grief and loss, it's finding the people in your life that can just listen to you. I always think about Leslie, and I do think this is one of the reasons why you and I do connect so well, is because you have to have somebody in your life that you can just, they'll pour you the cup of coffee or pour you the glass of wine, and you just get all the stuff out of your head without them trying to jump in with their lived experience, how they dealt with it, how they think you should deal with it. You just want a space where you can get it all out of your head, because human beings are pretty smart. And if we can be in a space where we can get all of the crap out of our head and just let it sit on the table for a minute, most of us know what we need to do. We don't want to do it, but we know what we need to do. We don't need 50 different opinions telling us what we should be doing, which feeds the guilt and the shame and that sense of isolation.
I like the analogy, get all the crap out of your head. I actually brought that one up because I do have some friends who have experienced recent loss. And then just going back to when in the thick of that loss that I experienced, I felt unlovable because I wasn't doing what other people expected me to do. And so that was a really tough one for me. And I know it is for other people as well, because they really struggle with that. Next question for you, my friend. Is it, if somebody is not in a relationship, and again, we all want to be a part of something, we're all looking for that human connection. And if they're not in a relationship and they're really wanting to be in a relationship and they're feeling unlovable and they are struggling with themselves and they're trying to figure out why don't I have a partner? That's a tough one.
Yes, extraordinarily difficult,
Yeah.
especially because in our culture, we are so pair up, pair up, pair up, have partners. We need to do that. So I think that's extremely difficult for people to do.
Yeah. And just tell them to be patient. I tell friends, be patient. That right person will come along. You don't want to force something.
It's true. The other thing that I think of too, Leslie, is that it goes back to that kind of top of the mountain analogy, is if you start walking towards your own core values, if you start moving that direction, you're moving away from the general mass of people, because most people are stuck in the trees with everything that's forced on us with social media and social expectations, all these things that are thrown on us. We just get sucked into believing that. So we're chasing the job, we're chasing the relationship, we're chasing the children, we're chasing all these things. And then we're exhausted and depressed at the end of the day, not feeling fulfilled. But when you think about literally climbing a mountain, the further up the mountain you go, there's less and less people there. But the people that you're getting closer to are people that are climbing the mountain too, that are making values-based decisions. So when I see people in the dating pool just going, there's nobody quality out here, and it's like, well, because you're still at the base of the mountain where everybody's kind of hanging out, not working on getting healthier. They're just being normal. And as a therapist, for years and years and years, what I would tell people, and I still believe this, is there's a fundamental difference between being normal and being healthy. Normal is normal, but being normal is unhealthy.
Interesting.
To be healthy, you have to work at it, and being healthy is not easy, or we would all be healthy in all areas, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. But it's very easy to be normal, because you can look around and go, well, everybody else is normal. But then you're going to find a normal relationship, which means you're going to struggle with depression. You're going to have a lot of fights. You're going to find a way to hang in there. And then you're going to find ways to just go, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I'll find somebody different. And then you find the same person in a different body. That's just the way that life works, unless you choose to be healthy. The more you work on being healthy, if you're alone, you start to find people in a different ether that are starting to work on the same things you are. And so, yeah, the pool gets smaller, but the quality is a different shift in quality as well too.
I actually love what you said right there, because you're like, you can get in a relationship, but then the normal is the arguments and the depression and the lack of understanding and just the everyday battles of everything. I think that it's important to, and correct me if I'm wrong, that people understand, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to be
Very,
alone,
very.
and it's uncomfortable to be in a relationship. There are different kinds of uncomfortable right there.
Yes.
So being alone, uncomfortable is difficult. And I just want to put out there to people, it's okay to pour a glass of wine by yourself and sit back and put on the movie you want to watch, right?
Absolutely.
That's never a bad thing. We have a question. I think this is a really good one because I've thought about this before myself. So thank you for the question. It says, what is the difference between self-love and self-absorption? How do I avoid becoming self-absorbed?
Beautiful.
Isn't that a
Oh,
great
that's a great
one?
one.
That's a
Yeah.
great one.
Yeah. Well, I think almost I love the difference in the terminology between self-loved and self-absorbed. Self-absorbed, I just think of a sponge. If it's just saturated with yourself, then where's there room for anything else? So having self-love is a core feature of being a healthy human being, to be able to be in that self-love perspective. But as soon as that self-love becomes self-absorbed and that sponge is completely full, where is there room for anything else in that personhood or in relationship? So if you're so self-absorbed, and I think there's all these words around, self-confidence or self-esteem or, self-aggrandizing. Like there's all these things about self. Having a core sense of a healthy human being of who you are, anything, this is what I'll go to, Leslie, with what we were just talking about earlier, is the significant difference between being normal and being healthy. Self-absorption starts to become unhealthy. Self-love is healthy. Self-absorption becomes unhealthy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And it's actually it really is such a thought-provoking question because as I'm understanding, self-absorption is like a sponge. And that is when you're focusing really on just what your needs are and what your thoughts and beliefs are, instead of looking outside and understanding that other people have different beliefs or different needs. Or am I on track?
You're on track, right? Well, and if you're not self-absorbed, then it allows me to soak up some of your personhood, and then we can find a relationship within that, or not find a relationship within that. But if I'm self-absorbed, it doesn't leave any space for you to be who you are in the way that you are. The only way you can be in relationship with me is if you are the way that I need you to be, that fits my self-absorption. That's different than me having self-love. Self-love means that I can set healthy boundaries, but healthy boundaries are permeable boundaries, which means I need to be able to adapt and adjust if this is of value to me. If our relationship lines up with our value set, then my behavior is either in line with that or it's not.
That's good. I actually have a comment here, and it is a good one. This is a tough one for Terry. She says, "I always tell people straight up, I don't care if you like me or not," and that's good. I mean, Terry, that's a great comment, and I apologize if that's what you're thinking that the podcast is about. Uh, and that's actually a good way to feel. It's like you shouldn't care about what other people think, but really what this is about uh, uh, is anybody who's struggling and wanting to feel like they belong to a group or something, or they're feeling lost and they're just feeling stuck and they're wanting to kind of shake that up. And but Terry, thank you so much for that, and always appreciate you.
Yeah, it's this goes back. My brain goes back to all the things that I know about motivational interviewing. This method, of being with people, and what it is there's an exertion of energy to go, I don't care what anybody thinks. It's not bad, it's not
Hmm.
wrong, but there's an exertion of energy. It can be seen or defined as I'm just setting healthy boundaries.
Hmm.
But even the healthy boundaries becomes an us them thing or a me and that person thing, which isn't bad. But what you think of too is even that can set a whole thing about, am I putting energy where I don't need to put energy? For some people, like in that situation, like for Terry, is that can just be a healthy boundary.
Hmm.
And if they continue to work and feel like they're getting healthier and they're more calm, what you start to find out is that you just don't pay attention to that. It just kind of sloughs away. instead of feeling like you're setting a boundary, you're just kind of walking on your path instead of setting boundaries around you as you're walking on your path. Does that make sense?
Right. That does make sense.
So again, it's not a right or wrong. There's just more than one right way to be able to approach situations like that.
And Terry's been an amazing viewer for years, so I feel like I know her, and I feel like I know her boundary set right there.
Awesome.
I've got a few, like I have a quiz that I kind of ran off for people, and we'll post the whole quiz as soon as we're done here. But and I kind of want some of your responses to some of these questions. It's just kind of a self-love quiz, okay?
Do you want my personal responses, or you want my thoughts on some of the questions?
I want both.
Oh, God. All right.
No pressure. No pressure at all. The first question, I feel complete.
I probably overthink these things. My first blush is yes, I do feel complete as a person. But I always want to grow too. So I feel complete with where I am. I feel complete, and there's still things that I want to accomplish.
I like this one. And this is a really good one for everybody, including myself. I'm kind to myself, even when things don't go as planned.
I'm so much better at that than I used to be.
Yeah.
I can say that. I like things to go the way that I like them to go. But I think because as a therapist and somebody that practices what I preach, I just feel like I've worked through so many of those things in such a healthy way that, I feel like I've been in pretty good.
You feel pretty good about that.
Yeah,
What do you tell somebody who is in that place where they're not so kind to themselves?
Then who's going to be?
Oh,
if you're not going to be kind to yourself, I mean, and this is just my own reaction to that. Is I just think there's just nothing about being a martyr that appeals to me personally. So I want to like myself and not be somebody that doesn't like myself but expects everybody else to be kind to me when I can't even be kind to myself. Like, how do they see that in me if I can't see it in myself? And again, different people navigate it different ways.
two more.
All right.
This one is for all of those out there that don't feel this. I don't feel lovable. I know you do feel lovable because you are, but for those that don't feel lovable, what would you say to them?
I'm going to turn this back on you.
Oh boy.
So what are your thoughts around that?
If you don't feel lovable.
I mean, I have thoughts, but you walking through your own process, because this is something.
Because it is a process I've walked through.
Absolutely.
Oh, this is where you're good, Casey. This is where you're good. I don't feel lovable. I've had many moments where I don't feel lovable.
Right.
And that's tough. So I would say to myself, and I would say to everyone out there who's having that moment where they don't feel lovable, just get through the moment. Get through the moment, whatever it is. 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day. Tomorrow's always better.
Yeah.
You are lovable. We're all lovable. Like you said, you don't have to be perfect at this and a straight A student or, the top person in your business. Just by being you, you're lovable. And look at the good things about yourself that you like and focus on those in that moment where you don't feel lovable.
I think about this again because we've talked about these things before. Can you recall those moments? Because I know the difference in the look in your face when all of a sudden things snap back into alignment. You're like, what the hell am I saying? I know who I am. I'm awesome. I know I'm great. I know I'm okay. And there's a difference between prior to that thought and then all of a sudden you do click into going, what am I thinking? Like, I am a good person. I know I'm a good person. I know I'm a good person. And it's not because I tell you that. It's because through conversation, all of a sudden you get recalibrated into who you are and how you know you are. What's that process for you?
You just have to think about it.
Okay.
Take a minute to do that, right?
Yeah.
Right? Well, this is what I want to say to everybody. I'm lovable. You're lovable, Casey.
Thank you.
All of you are so lovable. And we're so grateful that you were here with us today. Thank you for all of the questions that you had. Thank you for all of your insight and for continually just trying to improve on how to make people's lives the best that they can be.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. This has been amazing.
Anytime.
Awesome.
Anytime, my friend. All right. Go make the rest of your days the best of your days. Enjoy the sunshine that's out there right now. Just bundle up. It's cold out there. And we will see you back here next week on Leslie's Lowdown on Life. I'm shivering in here.